Hey friends and family, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com, and today I'm doing a video, as I promised yesterday, using the Erenberg Tarot, which is a brand new tarot deck, to do a demonstration reading. And I'm up bright and early because when I woke up this morning, we had snow. I thought for sure my husband was playing a very early April Fool's joke on me, because he's prone to do that. And I didn't watch the news last night, so I wasn't paying attention to whether or not whatever the weather was doing. So this sort of caught me by surprise. I'm glad it's a Saturday because I think all my children are home and they're not working, I hope. And we can just enjoy it from looking out the window and not having to be in it. Although I don't think there's quite that much. I mean, if you notice, the street is kind of wet, so it's not too slippery, I don't think, unless it ices. But anyway, I thought I'd take advantage of this great light, because I have northern exposure in this part of the house, and I want to take advantage of the great light without having to use any artificial light. Okay, so yesterday's video, I compared the Erenberg, which is, as I mentioned, a brand new tarot deck, with a very close facsimile to the original 1909 deck that had been created in unison between Pamela Colman Smith and Edward Arthur Waite. In fact, that video was an homage to her. This one, I just want to showcase this deck in a demonstration reading. And I thought of a really good question. That I'm not basing it on any particular individual's reading, because that wouldn't be cool, but I get enough of them that I can make it a generic reading. If you want to see the Erenberg deck in its entirety, I'll link below the comparison video that I did between the two decks. It's a lovely deck, and I think it's a deck that I'd like to use with some frequency, to be honest. It is Rider Waite Smith based, but I noticed that a lot of the Triumph cards really are not. They are more adherent to the concept of whatever was behind the each of those Triumph cards, but not necessarily Rider Waite Smith. The pips are the cards in this deck that I think are strong Rider Waite Smith references. But these, and this one, because this is more of a magus than a street hustler, But for the most part, anyway. So let me shuffle the deck. I have a question, as I mentioned. Let me show you. It's a little long. I have long hands, long fingers rather, and it's still a little long for me. It's almost uncomfortable, but not quite. But it's the name is, my brain is like really not good anymore. U.S. Game Systems Inc. So it's U.S. Games Systems Inc. Cardstock, which is adequate. I think they'll hold up for years. Shuffles pretty well. It's almost uncomfortable for me, but not enough that I can't riffle shuffle. Here, I'll show you how well it does. I mean, it doesn't have the buttery feel of, say, the Metelli by Marco Benedetti or the Hess by Giordano Berti, right? I mean, it's mass-produced cardstock, but it shuffles adequately well. Plus, it was under $30, so it's a great option. You'll notice that the artificial light goes on by itself because it's sensitive to sound. It's a clapper light. My granddaughter we have a clapper light elsewhere in the house. So now she thinks that all standing lamps can be turned on when you clap. So to keep that magic alive, we've put clappers on every single one of our standing lamps so that she can come in the room and clap her hands and feel like she's magic. Anyway. Okay, so today's video is going to be on this topic. A woman, and I'm going to say woman because very typically these you know what, I'm going to make it a man. I'm going to go against typical. So let's say a gentleman says that he has recently heard from the one that got away 30 years earlier. Somebody he was madly in love with, who, for whatever reasons, they broke up. Maybe it was his idea and he regretted it. Maybe it was her idea and he regretted it. But she's resurfaced. She wants to get together for old time's sake. And let's say he's currently married to someone else. And he wants to know what would become of this meeting. So let me go into my meditative place. I'll shuffle the cards a few more times to get them out of order. I think I've read that in order to thoroughly shuffle a deck of 78 cards, you have to give it a 10 to 11. I think it's 10 and a half riffle shuffles will clear the deck of the order. So I'll try to do at least that many. Let me go into my meditative place, explain to the universe that this is a demonstration reading that doesn't really have truth in it for anyone in particular, just to serve the public in how to use the cards in my signature spread to answer such a question. Alrighty, just do a couple overhand shuffles to guarantee that this is not a staged reading, as I think some readings on video might be. And remember that the question was in regard to a gentleman who's now heard from a long-lost flame who wants to get together, and he just kind of wants to know how he feels. You know, it's in a way, it's how he feels about it and how, sometimes we don't consciously know how we feel about something, and so the cards might help him realize whether or not this is a good idea. Okay, I don't concern myself with reversals, so that might be an indicator of regret. I don't read cards by themselves, per se, but en masse, it may. Wow, when they were young, he was her stud muffin, I guess. So there may be a sense of longing for the past. I'm going to be doing my signature spread. Happy memories. And the context of the question is how I'm reading the cards. In the context of the question, this number 2 of batons might be seen as, imagining what if. Reconstruct history. Now, I don't see anything about the wife. I don't see anything about his wife. So his wife isn't part of this equation. He's keeping her out of it. He's he's purely asking, I guess his own feeling for how he feels about this. So let's I'll calculate the quintessential cards and put them out here. I'll go off camera for that so you don't have to endure that process. Now, one of the reasons that I bought this deck was because I thought that it would look really awesome with, with a large amount of cards as I use in my signature spread. And I don't think I was wrong. I think they present very nicely. So now I've added the additional quint cards. In this case, it's called it's the Emperor here. The female Pope in this case would be called the High Priestess. And we have Temperance, and then we have Judgment for the outcome of the entire spread. Now, sometimes, most of the time, I cut to the chase, and I'll take a look at these quint cards first, because they give me a clue as to how each of these individual rows got us to each of these, right? So if I cut to the chase, and in a way, sometimes I really only need to read these 4 cards, but I do for the benefit of the reading, and for understanding nuance, I do interpret all the cards. But in this case, it seems like ultimately he recognizes, because he's really, this spread is really about trying to understand how he feels, that there would be some explaining to do. And there, Judgment is a card that suggests that, you have to account for your actions, right? So ultimately, there's that. We see no reference to his wife. There's no, queen here. There is the High Priestess, which could be representative of either the woman in question or his wife. Now, the High Priestess, if it's his wife, could suggest that she'd figure it out, or she'd have a hunch, or her intuition would tell her that he was up to something, so it's probably best not to keep it a secret. We'll see what this row shows. The Emperor, I guess, describes himself as an individual who has it under control. He's in charge, There's a little bit of bravado. And I'll put the camera back on its stand after I do this. And Temperance is, a sense of, mixing 2 worlds, right? The world of reality versus the world of the past. So we'll take a look at that. Let me get this camera back on its stand. So I guess this first row sort of describes, to some degree, a fantasy that, there was some remorse. He was a lot younger. Now he's a grown man, right? But when he was a lot younger, he was sexy, I think of all the suits, the suit of Wands is probably, this for me, represents, the sexiest, most charismatic types of individuals. And since it's typically a male, and it kind of looks like a male, I think this represents him. So him as he was. And then the Ace of Cups could sort of, in his back of his mind, represent a fantasy of rekindling something, Now, Sunshine, he seems like he's got happy memories, right? It was a happy period of his life, of longing. But, the structure of his life, the plan making of his life, fell short. Including them in each other's lives. It didn't fit into the master plan, I guess. And here, if it represents his wife, I mentioned that she might, it might not be so good to do this, because she would probably begin to suspect, because I think this shows that she has some intelligence, of emotional intelligence, and if you've been married any period of time, you can kind of sense when your spouse is up to something. I mean, I even know when my husband's like up to something benign, like doing something with the TV. What did you do to the TV? So we could definitely pick up on that. Now, if he's reminiscing about how it was like a very nice relationship, but plans didn't lend itself to a full-time, relationship, or to move forward any further. It might be, if this represents the other woman, that there was something about her that he wasn't clear on, or that frightened him, or that, she represented something that maybe he could not control. And so therefore it frightened him a little bit. And as I've mentioned many times when I do readings, cards can have multiple meanings at the same time. It could represent both his wife and the qualities of the other woman. Here we have a sense of ennui, like, let's look at all these cards together. Okay, ennui, indifference, an added burden that maybe he doesn't need to have. He sees himself as the emperor and as the king of pentacles, so maybe even part of him thinks like she's interested in his accomplishments, or maybe he's interested in a little bit of bravado and bragging about his life. Maybe she dumped him because she didn't think he had what it took to be a good breadwinner or something like that. But going back to a period of time when that might have been attractive to a woman, and it might still be to some individuals who might be attracted to somebody for immaterial comfort. It still happens, I'm sure. So part of him might be interested in going back to this, to meet her over a cup of coffee or something, to show that he was successful and that he was somebody who was worth pursuing. Because here I say that because here we get a sense of ultimately like disinterest, maybe on her part. Hooking up with him for the long term might have been a burden, an uphill battle. But he turned out okay. And he wants her to see that. Temperance is a balance. It could be seen as a balance. It could be seen as creating something new from something else, or just modifying. And then, as I mentioned, the Judgment card is he'd have to account for his actions. He couldn't keep this secret. He'd have to come clean, and it may not be something that he wants to do. So these are the things that I would think, if I'm interpreting this card for somebody with this question, is in understanding what it is he feels, to help himself articulate in his own mind whether this is a good idea or not, or what are the thoughts that are going through his head to help him understand whether or not this is a good idea. I think I've hit most of the points. It might interest him to do this because it represents a happy time. Maybe she didn't feel that he had what it took, right? And he wants to show her that he did. And he ended up being a great catch in his own mind, right? But, there was like a certain sadness or regret, but they were happy. Perhaps like a fantasy, a little blip of him, his ego perhaps wants to feel as though it could be rekindled, even if he wasn't going to do that. There's something satisfying, I think, in believing that the other person wants that. And it seems ultimately that he would be using it as a platform to show her how he turned out. But ultimately, I think he realizes that it's probably not a good idea to mix those two worlds. And ultimately, he'd have to account for his behavior, and, he'd probably have to come clean with his wife, and it might not be worth it. But I hope this reading was insightful to you. This is my signature spread. If you ever use it publicly, I would ask that you give credit to where you learned it. It's basically 3 rows of 3, which is not unusual. Many people do that. The thing that I've done is I just add the quint cards for each row and then the quint card for the final outcome. And as I mentioned, sometimes I just cut to the chase and just read these to give me the ultimate gist of the spread, of the understanding, and how each of these get us to these points. And I hope you agree that the Erenberg Tarot, which is brand new, is a lovely deck. And in many ways, especially the Triumph cards, are very reminiscent of the historic tarot decks. You know, we have the concept of the sun, right? We have the concept of temperance. Neither of these are particularly Rider Waite Smith. Where this deck is Rider Waite Smith reminiscent is in the pips. But in the Triumph cards, I think it's more in keeping with the old school. Well, here, this one's got a reference to the Ankh, which we clearly see in the Rider Waite Smith Emperor, but we have a globe or an orb, which we see in the traditional emperors. We see a beard, which we see in traditional emperors. And the female pope, we have the pomegranate. So I guess that's a nod to Rider Waite Smith for sure. And plus the cards are called the modern day names. But this one really cuts to the chase of being, you know, an old school, you know, the end, being summoned, right? Being held accountable, perhaps. I hope this has been insightful and interesting to you. Until next time, friends, peace and stay well.